Howdy folks, I'm Dan Gross and welcome to the first Spotlight special of Season 4 of the Rochester Indie Musician Spotlight, Rochester's premier music and interview show. For this special episode, I'm going to be sitting down with two Eastman professors, both of whom are doing thought-provoking projects for this year's KeyBank Rochester Fringe Festival. But first, let's have a word from those who make this show possible. This episode is brought to you by Bernunzio Uptown Music, Bop Shop Records, and Row Photo. Bernunzio Uptown Music, located in Rochester's East End, has been providing Rochester and the world with quality vintage, new, and used string instruments since 1976. Bernunzio also offers concerts, workshops, and jam sessions. This season we're in this warm, local, and creative space, Bop Shop Records. Located right outside the city at 1460 Monroe Avenue, Bop Shop Records is your Rochester home for blues, classic rock, jazz, and Americana roots music in vinyl for the past 35 years. Row Photo is your one-stop shop for photo, home theater installation, audio, and accessory needs. For 3 generations since 1898, Row Photo is there for you with second-to-none customer service. Stop by Row Photo's 2 convenient locations today. Next up is Professor of Music Theory Matthew Brown, leader and filmmaker of sorts for the ensemble TableTopOpera, I would say one of Rochester's most unique ensembles. This group of Eastman professors and staff get together twice a year to either do what they call a comic book opera or a fringe festival show discussing a particularly difficult topic and discussing it with music. This year, with the movie and eclectic ensemble, Tabletop Opera is playing music and musically exploring the topic of immigration with music by Cole Porter in a program they're calling Within the Quota. They'll be in Dryden Theater in the George Eastman Museum on September 19th at 7:30 p.m. I'm here with Matthew Brown and Christopher Winders. Guys, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Dan, for inviting us.
So let's do just a little bit about on your guys' background. So let's start with you, Matthew. Can you tell us a little bit about your musical background and how you came to the Eastman School of Music?
Been playing violin and piano since I was a kid. Went to Royal College of Music Preparatory Division in England, and I went to undergraduate school. I was a fiddle player, turned to academics, then I got a PhD at Cornell, time at Harvard, and then I came here in '86, and I've been a professor here pretty much ever since. So short trip. Time off in Baton Rouge in Louisiana, where I picked up...
That's a nice place to have some time
Well, it's
off.
also where I picked up the sax player in the band, so it's good.
So you actually are a professor of music theory.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about what a professor of music theory actually does for those of us who maybe still be learning about academic music?
I liken us to being the musical dentist or calculus or...
Well, like musical dentist, that's good.
We most people don't like doing music theory, and they do it because they have to.
It's necessary for your musical health.
Yeah, and that's. But it's mostly not wanted. So people, if you can think of the Laurence Olivier Marathon Man,
right?
That's me.
I couldn't think of a better song myself. Now, before we move on to Chris, now you do have a bit of a specialty, WC, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us just a little bit about WC and what you do in regards to his work?
Well, I've written a couple of books on WC. One was a sort of very academic, sort of serious scholarly book, and then the more recent one was a look at Debussy's impact on popular culture, and so it covered everything from the way in which Debussy's music was used in popular films. I think I looked at a Portrait of Jenny as a 40s biopic to Escape from New York and
Ocean's 11, the fountain at the end.
And then a bunch of lounge versions like Esquivel and stuff like that. And but it's been interesting to me because Debussy's a composer whose music lends itself to extra musical stuff, and so in 2012, when we had a big celebration of Debussy's 100th birthday, we put on a comic book production of Pallias and Olisov's my T-shirt, and we had a comic book artist, P. Craig Russell, who had done a comic book version of Debussy's Pallias, and that was the sort of the thing that catalyzed us into putting some multimedia stuff together.
Yeah, so we'll come back around to what exactly Matthew's talking about in regards to tabletop opera. But Chris, let's go to you. Can you tell us a little bit, and well, you guys both sort of do music and tech stuff for tabletop opera, but would it be safe to say that they're like a tech expert in this group?
Yeah, I'm the go-to guy when something needs to be plugged in.
Okay, so can you tell us a little about your
harebrained idea? He can go for
Well, I mean, we'll get to the tabletop genesis, but that was one of the things is we needed to find a solution to a problem.
Right.
And so my half of that has basically been finding the technical conduit, I guess, through which we can make these harebrained ideas.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about your background in music and technology and how you got to the spot you are now?
Well, I'm originally from North Carolina. I did my 2 preliminary undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. It's a multidisciplinary, it's kind of like Juilliard of the South, I guess is what they used to call it. First state-supported art school in the country, founded in 1963. But it's great. They've got film, dance, design and production, and all this. So when you ask of kind of where some of the tech things came in, well, I got to like write music and do tech stuff with some of my theater friends. One of my best friends was a stage managing major. I got to participate in some opera productions. Berlioz, Beatrice and Benedict, had to grow a beard, all this kind of stuff. It was great.
Oh, God forbid you had to grow a beard.
And I had to dye my hair and wear stockings.
Okay, now it's getting worse. I was going to say, because growing a beard is not too bad. He led with that, like, that was the worst thing.
Stockings.
Right, there we go.
No, no, the stockings were fun. I enjoyed that. That was great.
Things we're learning, Dan.
Well, the costume designer said I had good calves.
There we
so
go.
that just made it all the
Nice
best.
confidence boost.
But nonetheless, I also worked as the recording engineer for the music department. So, all the composers had to. I forgot to mention I studied composition. That was my degrees. Is we all had to study electronic composition and things like that as part of the composition degree. And so part of the function of that lab outside of the teaching side of things was also doing the archival recordings for all of the performances. So I did that. And so then you've got some cellist who's applying to Boston University who wants me to edit together his demo tape when he's playing some Popper etude that's so ridiculously hard to play that on the slide we do a little nursing. I actually edited together the entire first movement of the Tchaik violin concerto.
Got one note at a time?
In a couple places in the cadenza. Yes, I was.
Oh man!
So I got a lot of chops there.
Chops is right.
And so then I came up to Eastman to do my PhD in composition still, and there's yet another electronic music component there. So I was doing kind of some teaching assisting in the lab and getting right back into doing synthesis and editing and stuff like that. So it's always been in me, I guess, because I wanted to be a computer programmer when I was in middle school, but I ended up...
Hey, said no one ever.
Yeah, exactly. So I just ended up getting a bunch of MIDI gear and all this, and I took a year off from high school before I then... I went to Berkeley in Boston for a year, just in the film scoring department, which is a very tech-based, lots of synth-based stuff, and so yeah, it's always just kind of been in the background. So, you know, when our paths crossed, especially with the Pelias project, I guess I was kind of the guy that's like, how are we gonna get the comic book from the page with the music to the screen? And so that's kind of where I think Matthew really called upon me to kind of see how we could make that happen.
Yeah, and so we mentioned this in the intro a little bit. Tabletop opera. When we first met and had our first conversation about it, you described it as a ridiculous thing. And and that's the beauty of it. So basically what you guys do is you usually have about 2 productions a summer. It's a summer a year. It's a comic book opera, and then you do something in a similar format but a different style for Fringe Fest, where you just kind of discuss a more socially relevant issue. So when you mentioned trying to fill a need with the first comic book opera production for tabletop, and your love of WC kind of came together in Pelias. So can you tell us about that first production and what exactly are the elements of tabletop opera?
Well, when again, the need was that here's this really famous composer's birthday, and
he only wrote
the
one
school. There was no way we could put on a production. And I don't know that Pelés and Melisande actually ever had a stage production in Rochester. It's not it's a big orchestra.
4 hours.
You know, it's long. There have been concert performances, stage ones, but it's just too big and unwieldy. And I had encountered this comic book, and I thought, well, boy, you know, maybe we could do something. And I just invited a group of my friends. It was totally designed to be around friends. And the former dean, Doug Lowry, I chatted with him. He said, "Oh, I'll buy your computer and help you do this." And Doug was very generous, and fortunately, a lot of my friends and former students are great players, and they all volunteered. And we also learned too that I think we wanted to make kind of classical music appeal to people in ways that didn't actually kind of dumb it down, but presented it in a format that they could process. So we don't really see it as replacing the opera, but as a way of working in conjunction with it to help people know what the opera's about before you go and see it. You know? But it has the added advantage that an opera production would cost tens of thousands of dollars, and we can do it on a shoestring. There's no sets. There are no singers.
I was just going to say, I think you're talking about what a ridiculous and wonderful project this is. Your first thing, and you guys still do this, you do these comic book operas.
No sets, with no singers.
With no singers. You take opera excerpts and you put them together. So we'll talk briefly about who's in it in a moment. But you wanted something to say?
Well, I was going to say that they're not really excerpts. They're just slightly compressed.
Or we like to say distilled.
Yeah. Although when we did Salome, that was the second production. It's actually it's pretty much the whole thing. In fact, we had to add some music.
Because that's almost more of a monodrama where you have like one main character. It's 90 minutes, so we could do it as a concert. We just split it in half. So all the score is there.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say is we tried to make the opera productions about the same length as a movie. And we tried to make it as much like a movie experience as possible. Except that in an opera, you know, you have the singers on stage and you don't see the musicians. Here, you see the musicians, they're on stage. So it's a kind of a different feel.
Yeah.
When the other thing I would add is because you would ask, well, comic books, there's a lot of reading involved because of all the speech bubbles and all that. But then we shoot back, well, if you're going to watch an opera in French, most people aren't speaking the language and they're reading super titles the entire time anyway. And so what Craig's brilliance brings to this is now all of the reading is like then encapsulated in the scene. It's structured, it's formed in such a way that it's actually much more meaningful reading than just following along as super titles pop up along with a language you don't understand.
Right, so you can sort of see it a little bit in this camera here, but we have a projector screen up here with one of the images they use, and if you're going to a tabletop show, you'll see a big screen with the pictures and the movies that these guys have put together. And they do it in a way so that they play it, they do a couple rehearsals, and then the musicians play along with what they're seeing, so you don't have to time anything out. So when you go to a show, and this one's the George Eastman House, you can see the screen up here, and then the musicians are playing at the bottom. So can you tell us the musicians in this group? You mentioned the first one was just sort of a group of friends. Is it still the same lineup?
Not really. There are some of the same players, and the current group we always have two keyboard players. Pianist Albert Kim, who was a DMA piano here, who's now a professor in Missouri, and Darius Terefenko, who's a piano faculty in the jazz department. And we picked them originally because they can either sight read anything you put in front of them, or they can make it up.
Right.
So
they'll make you think they're sight reading if they're not.
And so the fact that they can make it up was very attractive to us, because if we had trouble, they would just provide music, and that was great. And then the bass player, J.B. Vandermark, has been a senior professor here for a while, and he's a boxer and motorcyclist. And
so you're saying he's a cool dude?
He's very. Currently we have Jim Thompson, who's a trumpet professor at Eastman School of Music, and we have Griffin Campbell, who's the saxophone professor from LSU, who I met, and have played in lots of bands of various types with Griff over the years. And then
he can do anything on the saxophone.
And the saxophone. This particular production, we didn't need a violin, but Federico Agostini, who's the violin professor here, is our regular player. Dave Ying will play cello with us if we need a cellist, and trombonist. We've done some pieces that have jazz ensemble, and so our trombone guy has usually been a jazz trombonist, and often a sort of senior student. And Brendan Lanigan's been doing it. Jackson's going to do it for this show.
Jackson Courtwright.
So that's fun because it allows us to have another person who's very skilled at improvising.
Yeah, and so you're saying it's an eclectic ensemble.
Oh, yeah.
Very.
So
this is our version of like what the Pierrot ensemble or whatever. It's kind of our version of that.
Yeah. Let's transition to sort of the final thing we wanted to discuss. So we mentioned you guys do two kinds of shows. You do either a comic book opera, and then the other thing you do is a sort of a musical social commentary, and you tackle fairly significant issues. You've done a show on child mortality. And can you tell us what the theme is for this upcoming show and what musical setting you guys are using?
Well, just a little bit of background on how I even came across this score is I've been working for E.B. Marks Publishing out of New York for a while and doing a lot of scores of the composer William Bolcom. And so he and another pianist, Richard Rodney Bennett, had come across the original manuscript for this Cole Porter ballet in pieces, and they put together a new version for two pianos, and I was asked to do the engraving for it by E.B. Marks. And I was like, once I started reading into the background of when this piece was written, what it was written for, Gerald Murphy was the guy who put together the scenario and then commissioned Cole Porter to write the music. They were friends and would vacation together in southern France, I guess, and while Porter was over there in the early 1920s, 1920, 21. So I got my hands on this and figured out what the quota idea was and all the immigration stuff and the Immigration Quota Act of 1921 that was passed and how that was affecting immigration numbers and all these things.
And the name of the play is Within the Quota.
It's just called Within the Quota, and it's about immigration quotas. You got a tag, you got a certain number from certain nations based upon a percentage of the population from that nation that's already in the country. And so if you go and look around where this was coming from and some of the legislative things that were going on, you get kind of a really uncomfortable feeling about how and what was driving this legislation, who it was targeted at, and so we started thinking about that. Plus, the music is basically just these little vignettes of an immigrant from the Northern Europe or whatever vho only has ideas of America from movie characters and things like that. So there's like some vaudevillian things, a sweetheart, there's a cowboy movies, all this kind of big city, big lights kind of thing. They get all that in their head, and that's kind of what Porter is making fun of with the music. It's very kind of a little bit on the campy side, and that he's kind of poking fun at that, because in between each of these vignettes is like some sort of prohibition officer or some like authoritarian figure that says, no, you can't have fun, and all these. So actually, it turns out that some of that music is missing of the authoritarian guy. So what we've actually built is we have the Porter giving us the vignettes, and we show period stuff, silent movies, and then I kind of adapted and composed new music that goes in between that kind of juxtaposes the historical aspects from the 20s with more relevant legislative things, pictures, and information that from current immigration policies, so that we can kind of see where we are, where we've come from. You mentioned the child poverty. That was one where we talked about child poverty and early death when Mahler was writing that, and then we juxtaposed that with the same figures from Rochester today. So we always try to make it relevant to what's happening right now. And so that was a bit of a whirlwind.
No, I know. I really appreciate the background, and I think that's why what you guys do is so important. And we often, I think as Americans in particular, I mean, Matthew, you might be able to comment on this a little bit, but America's a very new place, and I think Americans sort of forget that it's such a new place, and I think we forget that issues have been around for a really long time that we as a society haven't really figured out yet. And immigration and dealing with new people is certainly one of those things. And for you, why is presenting this music and discussing these issues important?
A couple of things, but first of all, the newness of the country. I came from England. I naturalized maybe 10, 15 years ago. Immigration is a problem in Europe. It's not.
Right.
It's not.
I didn't mean
US. No,
right.
but it's the idea of why we count ourselves as belonging to a nation is a pretty interesting question. And for those of us who've immigrated, and Darius Tarafenko, the keyboard plays from Poland, Albert's parents from Korea, Jim Thompson's wife is Canadian, Federico, who normally plays, is Italian, married to a Japanese wife. So the group has a lot of people who are immigrants who've loved coming to America. Most of us have naturalized and have contributed. I should add that some of the silent films you'll see that are made that were sent to Europe and watched to encourage people to immigrate. Many of the stars are actually European. So there's actually a clip involving Rudolph Valentino. There's one with actually a couple of scenes from Polo Negri from Poland and Greta Garbo. And so even the image of the kinds of that the US was sending is already full of European culture. So the idea of it. The big issue for us was to show, to sort of educate audiences in some of the more, let's say, darker moments and consequences. And so some of the scenes are, we have a section on the sending away of Jewish refugees in the 1930s because they wouldn't adjust the quotas to reflect the changes of in this case, refugees. We have a section on of what it meant to be a former, let's say you come from Japan in this case, in World War II, and then people are still suspicious of you because you're an immigrant.
Even though you're a citizen.
Even though you're a citizen. And then the other, a long one on the Bracero program, where the US government, and during the war, wanted Mexican workers to come and work, and then some of them stayed, and they were completely legal, but then there were various problems and often tragic consequences. And of course, there's a commentary of more recent things, but we did try to end on a happy note, and so the show does end with a lot of pictures of people at naturalization ceremonies.
They got the certificates and the flags and smiles.
I say half the members of the band have participated in these, and they are incredibly joyous events. They're just really important and shape your life.
All right, guys, thank you so much for your time. This is a really meaningful project, and I'm happy we got a chance to talk about it.
Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. It's great.
Thanks, Dan.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.